In this video, I'm going to talk about types of sources. Mainly, there are two types of sources. One is independent sources, another one is dependent sources. Independent sources always indicate with a circle. Okay, and dependent sources always indicate with a rhombus. Okay, so there are two types of sources. One is independent sources, another one is dependent sources. When it comes to the independent sources, again it is further divided into two categories. One is independent voltage source, another one is independent current source. When it comes to the independent voltage source, look at the voltage. When it comes to the voltage source will have always positive and negative signs inside. Sometimes we can indicate this with a battery also. Okay, these two are the independent voltage sources. Okay, and independent current source, whenever you see a current source, that current source always will have an arrow inside. Okay, so whenever you see this arrow, that's an independent current source. Best example for the independent voltage source is a battery. Battery is an independent voltage source. When it comes to the independent current source, as long as sunlight is constant, I would say solar panel is a current source. Solar panel is a current source. Now, when it comes to the dependent sources, it is further divided into four categories. So, dependent sources are further divided into four categories. The first one is current dependent voltage source. So when it comes to the symbol, it's a dependent source. It's clearly mentioned it's a dependent source. So definitely we'll indicate with rhombus. Now what kind of source is this? It is a voltage source. Okay, it clearly mentioned it's a voltage source. So whenever you see voltage source, you will see, we have to indicate with plus and minus inside the rhombus. Now this voltage source is depending upon the current. So I'm going to take some hypothetical number, 3 times Ix. Okay, so this Ix is the current passing through the some different element. So for example, you have a simple circuit, something like this. Okay, so here is a dependent source. Okay, now this is a voltage source. Assume that the current dependent voltage source, and here is the Ix. So the voltage supplied by the source depend upon the current passing through this resistance R1. Okay, so that's what Ix indicates. So here we're going to take only magnitude, not the unit. So for example, if you end up with finding Ix equal to say 2 ampere, now this is supplying 3 times 2, which is 6 volt. Okay, don't take the unit, just take the number. Okay, 3 times 2, it is producing 6 volt. So even though this is a current dependent voltage source, this is supplying voltage, it's not supplying current, but the voltage supplied by the source depends upon the current. Now the next one is current dependent current source. Okay, so it's a dependent source, clearly mentioned that. So as long as it's a dependent source, we indicate with rhombus. Now what kind of source is this? This is a current source. If it's a current source, we will see an arrow inside. Okay, and it is depending upon the current. So 4 times Ix. That 4 is a hypothetical number. So when we place this in the circuit, okay, either the manufacturer is going to define this value or we can calculate that value. But in this class, definitely I will give you this number. Okay. The next one is voltage dependent voltage source. Since it is a dependent source, so go with rhombus. Okay, and it is a voltage source, so for sure we'll go with plus and minus, and it is depending upon the voltage. So some hypothetical number, 7 times Vx. The Vx is the voltage across some element, so it could be something like this. Okay, so the voltage supplied with the source depend upon the voltage across this resistor. That's a voltage dependent voltage source. And the last one is voltage dependent current source. So it is a voltage dependent current source. It's a dependent source, so go with rhombus. Okay, and it is a current source, so definitely an arrow inside, and it is depending upon the voltage, which is 3 times the 3 is hypothetical number 3 times Vx or V1, something like that. So this is the voltage dependent current source. So I'm going to recap it. Types of sources. So when you look at the types of sources, there are 2 types of sources. One is independent source, another one is dependent source. The best example for the dependent sources are like transistors, MOSFETs. Most of the electronic circuits have dependent sources. When it comes to the independent sources, battery and solar panel, these are the independent sources. Now, independent sources again further divided into two categories. One is independent voltage source, another one is independent current source. And when it comes to dependent sources, they're further divided into 4 categories: current dependent voltage source, current dependent current source, voltage dependent voltage source, and voltage dependent current source. So here is a simple example. Look at the first diagram. What kind of source is this? First thing, it is a rhombus, so for sure it is a dependent source. What kind of source is this? If you see plus and minus, for sure it is a voltage source. Okay, so definitely this is a voltage source. Okay, but what is it depending upon? It is depending upon the Ix, where Ix is the current. So it is a current dependent voltage source. Here another example. In this example, rhombus, so definitely it is a dependent source, and you see arrow inside, so definitely it is a current source. If you see arrow, it is a current source. If you see plus and minus, that's a voltage source. Okay, now it is depending upon what? Vx is the voltage, so voltage dependent current source. Okay, these are the types of sources. I will stop this video here. In the next video, probably I'm going to start the new chapter. Thank you.